Welcome to your Healing Place podcast with Linda and Mindy. It is our desire to address common concerns of how abortion and faith intersect in order to validate the emotional pain and grief that abortion can bring and give hope that recovery is possible. But let's talk about Elroy. Let's just get into the nitty gritty of who God is and in this character of who he is and why it's so important that we understand and know God by name.
Mhm.
Maybe that would be a really good place to start because he's got so many names for those that don't know. For those that do know, sometimes it's just like, well, yeah, that's his name. But I don't think I would venture to guess anyway that probably a lot of people who call themselves believers have never really thought to ask God, teach me who you are by this name. I did that right
Mm,
after I got saved because somebody suggested it. And I was like, Lord, teach me who you are as Jehovah Rapha. I really needed to know God, the healer, the Lord, my healer.
mm,
And later he showed me who he, I wanted to know who Jehovah Shammah was later on in life. And he did. It was just a really powerful season of my life. You know, the Lord is there. And what does that really mean? To know that
mhm,
deeply, that that is who he is. And so we're talking about Elroy today,
mhm.
the God who sees.
Yeah,
And you mentioned Hagar as
yeah.
because she's the one that is first um,
That first
named
name of
God.
God. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it was
Pretty
spoken of in
powerful,
scripture.
pretty powerful. Yes, for those who may not know much about the story of Hagar, she was an Egyptian who, when Abram and Sarai went down to Egypt, returned with her in tow as a personal attendant and slave of the family. And so she came from a different culture, um, and had to, then blend into the family, so to speak, through their religion. And so when she was offered up to Abram as a way for Sarah, in Sarah's mind, to help God fulfill his
Mm.
promise to Abram to have a child, she ended up conceiving a son and named him Ishmael. And so twice, not once, but twice, she was put out of the household for various reasons, and sent into the desert. And when she encountered God, um, first of all, he told her to go back. He told her
Hmm.
to go back to the family, because he said, "Don't worry, I see you. I see you, and your son will become a father of nations. So, your son will receive a blessing. Um, But you need to go back. You need to go back. And what that going back was all about, I can't sit here and say, I can use my spiritual mind and think about it, but it sort of mimicked a lot of what African American women in this country were asked to do by God, I feel. There were times when, people left and ran away, and that's what they were supposed to do. And then there were times where women literally stayed in horrific conditions because God had something for their children, even in that, even in that. And so as I think about, Hagar continuing to be in a position where, um, she was subservient to others, she and her son still received a blessing. The first blessing was to know that God saw her. And I think that is one of the gifts of the Jewish culture, is that now they very much understand that you experience God in a certain way, and through that experience, he becomes real to you. He has a characteristic that shows up in an experience with him. So experiencing God is one of the most amazing things any of us can say can happen to us in our lives, because we become known to him and he becomes known to us in a brand new way. And so in her experience, she was able to be seen even though she was invisible in this family that she served in.
Mm.
And so that to me very much mirrored our experiences as African American women in this country.
You know, part of her experience was in being obedient to God. She would not probably have received the blessings of God in the same way, or maybe it would have been harder had she not walked in obedience as hard as that was, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
difficulty in walking in obedience. It's not always easy and it's not always, this rah fun time. Sometimes it's really, really hard. And I would say that while most of us, probably the vast majority of us in this country are not experiencing slavery or any kind of oppression like that today. There's still oppression happening in this country in different ways, right? There's abusive, there's,
Mm-hmm.
you know, all kinds of other ways that oppression is still happening, and abortion is oppressive to any woman who experiences it because now they come into this, shadow of silence. I can't tell anybody, when in fact there are millions that
Mm-hmm.
actually can be told to. There are people right next to us everywhere we go that have abortions that nobody's talking about. And if we would talk about them,
Right.
our voice would become really strong. But not just to talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
but to understand that God sees us in that. I mean, how important is it to be seen? It's that depth of being known. When somebody
Mm-hmm.
really sees you, you're known. And God was saying, Hagar, I see you in this moment. You might not be seen anywhere else, but I see you and I know you. Like there, that goes
And that
together. That's just not a, hey, I see
that's it.
you, but that's a, I see the depth of you. I think that was one of the things I was
Right.
screaming out in my life is why doesn't anybody love me? And
Mm.
really what I was asking, why does anybody care about the internal me, the real me, not the external me? Aren't I of any value to
Mm.
anybody?
I heard a quote the other day, I think I've
Mm.
shared it before, that to be known and not loved
Hmm.
is tragedy. To be loved but not really known is shallow.
Mm-hmm.
But when you pair those
Mm.
two things together, to be fully
Mm-hmm.
known and fully loved, that's what our heart's desire
Right.
is. And
Yeah.
that's what I think
Yes.
that's what when he says, I see you, I know you. And it's women that have had abortions, sometimes it's kind of scary. It's like, God, don't look at me.
Yeah.
I've got this in my past. I don't really want to be known. And yet he
Right.
has a way of opening us up and letting us know that he sees it all and still
Yes.
loves us. That's the amazing thing.
Yes, I agree. I agree. He has a blessing with our name on it, no matter what our circumstances are. And that's the beauty now of women being able to know that he sees them because I like to connect what we go through oftentimes with biblical characters. As part of one of the other characteristics of this book is that I will pull out, characters in the Bible that have been through because people need to see, this isn't God's first rodeo, right? He's
Right.
he's seen it. He knows and he understands and then there are circumstances where people have overcome and this is how they've done it is because they've trusted God. As you said, they've wrestled with God about this and they've experienced him and then they've come into an understanding. And that's what he wants for his daughters who've been through abortion. He wants us to wrestle with all of this, but he wants us also to understand that he knows the depth of our pain. And then no matter what other circumstances we're in, he knows us. The world doesn't have to understand. They may
Mm-hmm.
not ever get our grief, Linda,
Mm-hmm.
like you're saying. They may not ever understand the depth of our grief, but he knows it. And when we know that he knows and that he sees us, we're more than the world against us then, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we know that he knows us.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about that story in, I believe it's in Mark 3, where Jesus goes into the synagogue and there's a man in there with a withered hand.
Mm.
And Jesus knew of him. And he went up to him and he said, stretch out your hand. He didn't tell him why. And that that man was hiding his hand. First of all, it was withered. It was probably
Mm.
ugly. He was probably considered unclean. He wasn't like proud. I'm sure he had shame surrounded by that. And that's kind of what our heart's like, that little withered part of our heart. Maybe it's our whole heart, depending on where we at in our healing journey from abortion, that's just withered away and
Mm-hmm.
unuseful and shameful and something we don't want to show anybody. And Jesus that day asked him to stretch out his hand. I mean, this is in the synagogue, so there was people around, but his intent was to heal him, and his intent wasn't to shame him or embarrass him, but it was to say, give it to me. Do
Yeah.
you trust me? And Jesus saw him. And he knew. And, the conversation that took place between him and the Pharisees that day was because the Pharisees were so angry he was going to heal on the Sabbath. And he's like, is it lawful to do good or to do evil? Well, that makes sense, right? But then his next follow-up statement was, is it lawful to save life or to kill?
Mm.
And my question always is, how is he saving that man's life that day? But that's exactly what he was doing, because he was going to return to him his purpose in life. He was going to return to him his station in life because he was considered unclean. And I believe it's his right hand. So it was his hand of dominance that, the Israelites have this whole thing with right hands back then, being if you were left-handed, you were kind of an outsider too. So I just love that all of that picture together. God finds us in our misery.
Mhm.
With abortion, that guy lived with that withered hand for years. We do the same thing. We just try to push through with a part of our heart that's just completely dry and withered up.
Mm.
And we try to go on and we try to move on and live our lives and do what we're going to do. And sometimes we do well. Many of us do really poorly because we just act out in bad ways. But God finds us.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I like the
And
part that you said where he had to stretch that hand out. There was a surrender to what
yeah,
Jesus asked him to do, a step of obedience. And
yes.
sometimes that first step is the hardest, isn't it?
Thank you for listening. This podcast was inspired by the many conversations had through the years with women struggling from the emotional pain associated with abortion. Thank you for allowing us into your healing journey. Subscribe on major platforms where podcasts can be heard. Learn more about virtual abortion recovery healing at www.anevenplace.com. The link is in the show notes.